Here's another reaction video related to the Chuck Schumer speech. The other one kind of related to things Peter Beinart had said, what the New York Times had said, what Thomas Friedman had said and written. This one is going to be reacting to Phyllis, who appeared on Democracy Now! Full disclosure, I had an interaction with her about 15 plus years ago when she spoke at SUNY Albany on this subject. I had been checking things out for just a few years. Had been learning about Palestine and Israel. I was going to see everything that I could. There was a regular Q&A after her talk, and there were a couple questions. Then I asked about what she thought about the two-state solution versus the one-state solution, ideas about pros and cons to those different takes on solutions and what can be done. She immediately stopped the Q&A, gave some kind of short answer, and then proceeded to walk over toward me and excoriated me for asking such a stupid question. She was clearly angry that I had asked, and she clearly thought that the two-state solution was the only way to go and thought one-state concepts were completely ill-advised and stupid. She was clearly upset. Ever since then, I've not really known what to make of her. So whenever I, see her speak, she's got a lot of information. She's very studied. She's got a lot of knowledge. She's got a lot of credentials and a lot of respect from a lot of people. But full disclosure, I had that interaction with her. So possibly my take on things she has to say are skewed. But, she's also talking about this Schumer speech, so I wanted to see what she had to say. So here we go.
Phyllis, if you can talk about what the U.S. has introduced into the UN Security Council, it could be voted on today.
What we're looking at here is a lot of playing with words. What is different is the language of the Biden administration, using the word ceasefire, saying immediate ceasefire in some cases. We're seeing the New York Times is saying that the U.S. is introducing a resolution at the Security Council calling for an immediate ceasefire. That's not the case. The first operative paragraph of the resolution uses the language of an immediate ceasefire, but it doesn't actually call for a ceasefire. But the key thing is that the U.S. draft does not call for an actual Security Council call for a ceasefire.
I would say good on Ms. Bennis here for calling out the administration on using rhetoric that sounds like one thing, but isn't really another, kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. This happens all the time, particularly toward Israel, where their rhetoric will be saying one thing, but they never follow up on it, or they use language in such a way as to sound like they're saying something, but if they get called out on it, they can point at it and say, oh, it didn't really mean that. That's what's happening with the ceasefire thing. And good on Bennis for calling it out.
And there's a question whether the House Speaker will be inviting him to address a joint session of Congress. If you can talk about what Netanyahu is doing, the significance of the calls for there to be new elections by none other than the majority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, a real change from the way he has embraced the Israeli leadership?
Over the last 15 years or so, there's been a significant shift in how support for the long-standing U.S. support for Israeli military, its military support, its economic support, its political and diplomatic support, how all of that shakes out in Washington. It's become a much more partisan issue. The polls have been showing that for years now, that there's a massive shift underway. It's particularly generational, but it's also between parties, where on the Democratic Party side, support for Israel has diminished profoundly. And on the Republican side, it's been a complete embrace of all things Israel.
Okay, here's some stuff from Phyllis Bennis that I think is more in line with the Friedmans and the Beinarts and the New York Times op-eds. Kind of DNC cheerleading in a way. These exaggerated kind of nonsensical claims. See if I had to write them down, stuff that she said, so I'm going to read a little bit here. So Bennis says there's been a significant shift in support for Israel recently. It's become a much more partisan issue. There's been a massive shift. Democratic Party support for Israel has diminished profoundly, whereas the Republican Party has a complete embrace of all things Israel. Okay, so she's painting the Republican Party as the pro-Israel party, and the Democrats as the anti-Israel party, or some approximation of that. And this is in the context of the Biden administration sending millions and millions and millions of dollars to allow Netanyahu to slaughter tens of thousands of Palestinians. This is the anti-Israel, anti-Netanyahu Democratic Party that she's talking about. The one that is funding and promoting genocide, and is the sole reason Israel is capable and able to do this at the moment. It doesn't make any sense at all, particularly in this context. There may be some kind of polls that she can cite that show, some kind of shift, and a few people here or there in the Democratic Party that, use some type of rhetoric that doesn't paint Israel or Netanyahu in a positive light. But you can do that. I'm sure there's plenty of people in the Republican Party that do that as well. This is absolutely a bipartisan issue. Has been for many, many decades. It still is right now. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party both support Israel almost entirely and all the time. Trying to paint this as now having become some kind of bipartisan thing, and the Democratic Party is now anti-Israel or something. It's ridiculous. She's carrying water for the DNC.
What we're seeing now is a continuation of that, certainly, with the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives following what happened in 2015, when the Republican leadership in the House at that time invited Netanyahu, who was the prime minister then as well. Netanyahu ignored the White House, came at the invitation of the Republican leadership of the House, and gave what amounted to a campaign speech. We're seeing essentially a repeat of that now, where he is emerging as a partner of the Republican opposition that is demanding more support for Israel, more money for Israel, more arms for Israel.
Okay, now here she is saying it again, that the Republican Party is demanding more weapons, more money for Israel, as if the Democratic Party isn't as well. The Democratic Party is also demanding all this stuff and is the party that is in charge right now. It's the Democratic president that is giving all of this support, financial, weapons, diplomatic, all this support to Israel right now, and she's making it out as if it's some kind of Republican, led effort. Now, I hate having to say this stuff because I hate the Republicans. People hear me and other people say stuff like this and try to paint us as being supportive of the Republican Party, or worse, Trump supporters, which I, of course, am not. He's a jackass. Everybody knows this. But, you can't not say these things for fear of being painted a Trump supporter. That's, people cannot shut up about this stuff for fear of being called some kind of Trumpster. I certainly won't. Not that what I have to say matters in any way. Anyway, but, I don't care if I get labeled that. I know I'm not.
At a time when the Biden administration itself, despite its change of language, is continuing to send more weapons and more money, trying to get Congress to approve $14 billion more in military aid to Israel without any conditions, in violation of U.S. law.
Now listen to this. After she has said all that stuff about, trying to make it out as some kind of Republican-led effort, this genocide, this mass slaughter, she turns right around and says exactly the opposite. It's very hard to make sense of. And it's also, I hate to say it, it's very kind of Zionist, cognitive dissonance, talking out of both sides of your mouth kind of thing. And it's, it's the kind of thing where, the the truth is just easier to remember, you know. So it makes it hard for people that aren't necessarily telling the truth, maybe, to get their story straight.
Doing work
I
on
wanted
this
to
issue.
quote from the over 100 Democratic donors and activists who've written President Biden's campaign, warning the president's support for Israel's assault could cost him the election, saying, quote, because of the disillusionment of a critical portion of the Democratic coalition, the Gaza war is increasing the chances of a Trump victory. You have former diplomats, people from the Pentagon, the State Department, the White House, like Clinton's National Security Advisor, Anthony Lake, you know, deep establishment people.
And there is where we really start getting to it. What Amy Goodman is talking about here with Phyllis Bennis here. She's talking about these funders, funders of the Biden campaign, over 100 Democratic donors and actors, Clinton's National Security Advisor, and what I think Amy called deep establishment people. They're all clamoring for this change in policy towards the massacres in Gaza. And of course, the reason that they're so concerned about this and the reason they want change in the policy is because they fear losing the election to Trump. They don't care about Palestinians getting killed. They don't really care about any kind of policy change. What they want is to virtue signal about that so that they don't lose the election to Trump. That's what this is about. It's easy to see Bennis's characterization of this now being a bipartisan issue where she's painting the Republicans as being pro-Israel and Biden administration and the Democrats being anti-Netanyahu or something, which is, like I said before, it's completely ridiculous considering what's happening right now. But she's doing that possibly subconsciously as some way to help the DNC because she's got this Trump derangement syndrome happening. It is bizarre and dangerous, and it's getting Palestinians killed.
But we want to have your final comment.
One of the things I just want to point out in the last moments, this issue of Chuck Schumer coming out against Netanyahu, there's a move to isolate Prime Minister Netanyahu right now. But we have to be very clear that the people who are likely to replace him, if he were to either resign or be recalled in an election, they all support this war. So we should not have the illusion that I'm afraid people like Chuck Schumer and others might have, that anybody who's not Netanyahu should be and would be welcomed with open arms in Washington with more weapons, more hundreds of smaller weapons shipments that wouldn't necessarily have to be approved by Congress. This is a very dangerous reality. We have to be very clear that this is a systemic decision by the Israeli leadership. This is not a one-man show in this horrific genocidal war that is being waged in Gaza. And we have to be careful not to fall into that trap of putting it all on one person and thinking that if one person is replaced, somehow that's an answer.
Bennis's last words here are spot on, talking about the fact that it's not only Netanyahu, it's a systemic problem in Israeli politics and in Israeli culture. And if you get rid of Netanyahu by isolating him, which she was saying Schumer is trying to do with this speech, it doesn't matter. It's a game of whack-a-mole. There's another 100 Netanyahus in the Knesset waiting to take his place. It's not going to make a difference in terms of Israeli policy towards Palestine. And she's right about that. The thing is, all the other stuff she said before in characterizing the Republicans as the bad guys and the Israel supporters and the DNC, Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party as the good guys who are, being tough on Israel now, that kind of defeats her criticism of Schumer's speech. She set it up to get people to think that it's the DNC they should be supporting if they want to stop this massacre and if they want to have some kind of change in Israel. Yes, I'm aware that this lighting is creepy. I apologize. I'm not a professional video maker.